So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to 19 Washington Square North, which is the home and intellectual center of NYU Abu Dhabi here in New York. My name is Michael Pruganen. I'm a professor of biology here in NYU, New York, and I also run a laboratory at NYU Abu Dhabi to study date palms, actually. And for my sins, I am the academic director of 19 Washington Square North, which actually is a really interesting and exciting job because what it does is it allows me to meet people from all across the disciplines and to help present public programming to you on a regular basis. So 19 Washington Square North, over the course of the academic year, will host many public lectures, talks, workshops, conferences. And many of these are organized by the NYU Abu Dhabi Institute, which is led here by their Director of Academic and Research Programs, Sharon Hockenbergman over there in the corner, and her staff here. So this is a place where members of the community, both the NYU community as well as the general public, can come and learn about new things that are happening in our world today. So today we're very, very pleased to see all of you in this public lecture on future foods by one of our faculty colleagues and one of my faculty colleagues at the Department of Chemistry, Professor Kent Kirshenbaum. I've known Kent for a long, long time now, since we've been faculty members. I think we started at about the same time. And so I've always been fascinated by his work, not only in pharmaceutical chemistry or drug development, that's actually his area of expertise, but as a foodie myself, it's always been a pleasure to talk to him because of his secret life as somebody who studies the scientific basis and the chemistry of cuisine. Kent obtained his PhD in pharmaceutical chemistry from the University of California in San Francisco and conducted postdoctoral research in protein chemistry at Caltech. As I said, at NYU, he leads a research group that's using biomimicry to discover new drugs. But Kent is also the co-founder, or was the co-founder, of the Experimental Cuisine Collective here at NYU. And he has appeared numerous times in many different public spaces, in the Food Network, the Cooking Channel, the Science Channel, Sid the Science Kid, NBC Learn, and the Discovery Channel. And today, when I said, Kent, you've got to give a talk at 19 Washington Square North, I said, I want you to talk about your work in food. And so it's a pleasure to welcome you all here this afternoon and to welcome Kent to the podium.
Very much for that introduction. And I do really love talking to people about science, about chemistry in particular. I love having the opportunity to let people know that they can engage with science, they can engage in chemistry as part of their everyday lives. That it's not just geeks like myself slaving away in some laboratory with a bunch of smelly chemicals around. That chemistry really does pertain to all of us and can enrich all of our lives. But that can sometimes be a difficult conversation because there are a lot of people who are averse to this concept. And so I'd like to introduce you to the bravest woman I've ever known, my late mother-in-law, Marianne Wolf. I considered her a total superhero. She grew up in Germany, and just to show you what force of spirit she had, she signed herself up for the Kindertransport at the age of 6, completely restarted her life in England, and then started over again here in the United States. Marianne was afraid of nothing, absolutely nothing, except she was a chemophobe. And when I told her that I'd been working with a lot of chefs and developing different kinds of foods, she said, that's absolutely terrible. And I said, why? She said, chemists do not belong in the kitchen. She said, I do not want chemicals in my food. And that just blew my mind because, of course, without chemicals, we would have no food. Our food is composed of chemicals. And I did my best to convince Marianne. Not sure if I completely convinced her. But unfortunately, this concept that we have to stay away from chemicals in our food is really prevalent. And another example is the food babe who says there is just no acceptable level of any chemical to ingest ever. So who is the food babe? here she is, Vana Hari. She has a big social media presence, and where she's able to come out with expressions like lemon water is very alkaline, which doesn't necessarily jibe with my understanding. But she also has published a book about these sorts of topics called The Food Babe Way. Break free from the hidden toxins in your food, that's chemicals, and lose weight, look years younger, and get healthy in just 20 days! Exclamation point. So this is like the prevalent paradigm that we have to overcome when we talk to people about the fact that scientists, chemists can really add to the culinary experience in our own kitchens, in restaurants, and in food systems globally. So that's been my effort, founding this group, the Experimental Cuisine Collective, and getting the chance to talk to people all around the world about the intersection of science and cuisine. And really it boils down to this for me, that all foods are composed of chemicals, all flavors are of chemical origin, and all taste perception is a chemical phenomenon. And once we appreciate that, we can really do so much to enhance our foods and develop new food systems. So a few years back, I did decide that it made sense to do this kind of science outreach work with experts in food studies here. The Department of Food Studies here at NYU was, I believe, the very first food studies department in the country. And I worked in particular with Professor Amy Bentley. And I also contacted a celebrity chef who at that time was running a dessert restaurant right here in the neighborhood, Chef Will Goldfarb. He's recently been named I think the best pastry chef in the world. And we got together along with some other participants, in particular a student named Anne McBride, to start this Experimental Cuisine Collective and talk to people about what happens when they cook, work with chefs to develop new recipes and explore new ingredients. And so we tapped into kind of a zeitgeist at the time. Time magazine referred to our work as one of the 10 ideas that are changing the world in the area of kitchen chemistry, which was really nice to feel as though we were making an impact and really reaching people. There is an important concern, and I understand, my mother-in-law and why she felt that way. I understand about this notion that we have to be concerned about scientists depositing toxins in our food, because we need to ask the question, is science making our food better, or is it just making it worse for both us and the planet? And this is one example of the chief scientist at Frito-Lay Corporation, interviewed in New York Times Magazine, and he had this extraordinary statement. He said regarding the product developed by Frito-Lay, I feel so sorry for the public because they'd done such a great job understanding the science of taste perception that they'd engineered their products to be virtually irresistible. So maybe I'll just say, just say no to Frito-Lay. It started down that path. But this is, part of a problem about engineering our food and having scientists get involved in developing new food products. So food systems, they are definitely part of the problem that we face globally. 20% of the fossil fuel that we use is devoted to producing food, major source of greenhouse gas emissions. And particularly in this country, we have to be very concerned with how our food systems are negatively impacting our health. Michael Pollan has estimated that $500 billion is spent annually on healthcare costs that are directly related to limitations in our diets. And that's just in the United States. But I think that science, chemistry can also be part of the solution. And so let's just take a very practical problem. the price of eggs. And somehow the price of eggs has not come down over the past couple of weeks. You can see the price of eggs right here since 2020 really peaked and then is taking off again. A lot of this is due to problems of avian flu affecting chicken populations. And it's gotten so bad lately that when you go to the Waffle House, they will give you a surcharge if you try to order eggs as part of your breakfast. So I think we can do something about this. And we can take inspiration from a really interesting recipe that I was turned on to from the Syrian city of Aleppo. And this is something called natif. And this is a dessert topping. And so you can see that this has got this beautiful, shiny white meringue type appearance to it. We looked up the recipe and we saw that it involved soaking soapwort in water and then whipping that up. And so we became really curious, like, what is going on here? And we began to look as far as what the chemical constituents of that soapwort extract might be. And what we found is that these roots are very rich in a class of molecules called saponins. And so for those of you who are familiar with chemical structures, you'll see this group in here is a very greasy group. It's rather like a steroid, like cholesterol. And then these groups around here are actually sugar groups. They're very polar, very water soluble. And it's characteristics of a molecule incorporating a greasy core and a very water-loving exterior. These are called amphiphilic molecules, and they're part of the characteristics of soaps. Many soaps have these characteristics. So that kind of explains why we're able to generate a frothy material from this. And in fact, some of these saponin-rich plant extracts have been used as soaps, including the soapwort plant, also beautiful plants like Malaha saponaria and this gorgeous desert plant, Yucca shitigera. These extracts are used in food products today. Root beer, for example, the frothy part of the root beer, that would be from saponin. And in fact, when you get your light beer, oftentimes it's had saponins added to it so that they can overcome the fact that they've watered down your beer and still give you a nice frothy head. So these are important plant products, and they come from a lot of food sources: soybeans, yucca, as I mentioned, alfalfa, licorice, quinoa. All of these have a lot of saponins. As you wash your quinoa, when you're using that, and you might notice that it gives off this frothy, soapy stuff. Those are saponin molecules. And so we can think about tapping into this stuff and using it as an ingredient. And chickpeas, in particular, are rich in saponins. And now we're exploring how to use chickpea brine as a substitute for eggs. And in fact, you can even get these products that are essentially freeze-dried chickpea brine powder. It's called aquafaba. I've got some here. You can use that as a replacement for egg whites. This pack right here says it will replace 120 eggs, which is pretty good, especially given the price of eggs these days. And you can use it as a meringue powder. So I don't like talking about food without doing a little bit of cooking myself. So I brought a can of chickpeas. I'm just going to pop the top open. Okay, and I'm just going to clean that out. Just shut these beans here. Okay, gonna add a little bit of sugar. And what the heck, a little bit of vanilla. Why not? And I'll just run over here to my mixer. And I'll just whip this up. So this is noisy, and it takes a lot of time. So what I'm going to do, and I'm allowed to do this because I've been on the Food Network. I've got the swap out. And so I made this just before we got started here, about half an hour ago. And you can see that it's made this wonderful meringue-like consistency. You can whip this to stiff peaks. It's a great egg white replacement. Do I have any volunteers? Anybody want to taste it? May not be fabulous, but tell me if that tastes like a dessert topping.
Totally does. It's
Totally
rich.
does. This is aquafaba, and this represents what we can do when we think about the chemical constituents of our food. We can essentially take something that's garbage that you might throw away, and I have a big issue with food waste, and turn this into something that can replace a expensive ingredient. So this is, just one of the things that we've been working on. We've used this egg white substitute as a replacement for whipped cream in cocktails. This is at a cocktail bar in Wellington, New Zealand, where we made a cocktail called Café Brûlot. We made a really nice, totally vegan version of this New Orleans cocktail down there. And we had a lot of fun doing that. It turns out that you can take this same exact stuff and bake it and turn it into a baked meringue. And we developed this working with the food studies department. And it turned out quite nicely. I brought some today that I made a while ago. And they're nice and light and fluffy. Do I have any volunteers?
Sure.
Okay.
What?
Do you want to try one? Okay. Go. So yeah, we were down in New Zealand and Australia, and we made a pavlova, totally vegan pavlova. I think it was the first vegan pavlova that had ever been made down there. We had a great time. We came back and we talked to the Office of Technology Transfer here at NYU, and they initiated a patent on our vegan meringues. We never ended up pursuing it, but we had a whole lot of fun. And they kept asking me to come back to the tech transfer office, bring more samples. We had a really good time. So yeah, we've working with the Experimental Cuisine Collective and the Food Studies Department, we brought in just some amazing speakers, culinary experts, scientists. We've got Rachel Dutton, microbiologist, working on the microbiology of cheese ripening. Rosalie Birnbaum, author of the Cake Bible, the Pie and Pastry Bible. Ferran Adria came, was regarded as one of the greatest chefs in the world. Michael Lascones came. He is the pastry chef at the Bernardin. He brought 4 assistants and he served 8 courses of desserts at one of our presentations. So just had a great time. And our own Marion Nessel from the Food Studies Department, who is just such a hero. She was able to come and give us her insight with regard to nutrition and our food systems. So I've learned a whole lot. I've just been blown away by the creativity of people working in the culinary sector. And it's gotten me out of my comfort zone and allowed me to see things from a different perspective. People working at this intersection between science and cuisine really appreciate, basic research. And Hervé Thies, who's an expert in molecular gastronomy, said the fact of the matter is that we do both chemistry and physics whenever we make a sauce or grill a piece of meat. And we should really explore what that's all about if we want to make great sauces, if we want to do a really good job when we grill our meat. We should understand the chemistry, understand the physics. And yeah, it turned out to be quite a hobby for me. And I began asking questions in a different way. At some point, somebody was asking me about liquid smoke. Like, where does that come from? What's in it? I was like, oh no, that stuff's horrible. But I was like, I don't really know how it's made. I don't really know what's in it. And so I did some demonstrations where I made liquid smoke. We actually ended up using it to flavor ribs, and we were on the Food Network with that one, and that turned out to be quite tasty after all. But it turns out that a lot of techniques and a lot of equipment has migrated from the kinds of research labs that are here at NYU, here in my lab, right on Washington Square, and they're ending up in restaurant kitchens. And this is one example, a couple of experts working at French Culinary Academy at the time, Nils Noren and David Arnold. This machine that they've got right here is a rotovap. And this is what we use in the lab when we want to remove our solvents after we've performed a chemical reaction. And this is brilliant because they were saying, well, when we want to make a reduction, let's say of some kind of fruit juice or something like that, typically what you do is you take your pot, throw it on the stove on the cooktop and boil it away. Well, you can destroy really delicate flavors. And there's a better way to concentrate things, which we do all the time. And it's not to heat things up. It's actually to reduce the pressure over a solution. By applying a vacuum, you can remove solvents, you can concentrate things. And so they've done this really nicely with a whole variety of different things and retained a much better flavor balance in those reductions. Some of the things that we regard as being really common in our lab really had a revolution when they ended up in the kitchen. This is for us a piece of scientific equipment, a constant temperature bath, very typical. And then chefs realized, like, wow, we can get phenomenal precision and control over how we cook when we are able to control temperatures to 1/10 of a degree. And this is now, a sous vide machine that is sold to culinary experts around the world. And you can't really tell the difference between that and the constant temperature bath that we use in the lab. But you can do amazing things when you have that kind of control and when you understand the processes at the molecular level. So David Arnold, at that time, was trying to figure out how he could control precisely the texture of eggs that were cooked using this sous vide approach, precise temperatures. And so he took eggs and he heated them within these constant temperature baths at precise temperatures, 62 degrees Celsius, 63, 64, 67. And he was able to reproducibly, every time he'd crack an egg open, and he'd tell you before he busted it open exactly what the consistency of the yolk would be like. If you want to roll it in sheets, want to heat it to exactly 66 degrees. You want a granular yolk, 72.5 degrees. And this has now been adopted in many kitchens around the world to be able to provide consistency, reproducibility, reduce food waste because you don't overcook or undercook your eggs. So I do think that food science is part of the solution to many of our global problems, including public health issues. And we now appreciate that certain diets around the world seem to be associated with beneficial health outcomes. And at this point, we're all familiar with the benefits of the Mediterranean diet. And I'll just show you the very typical kind of result that the public health experts have been able to obtain, monitoring populations over a period of years. And you can compare just a regular low-fat diet with a Mediterranean diet that's high in olive oil or high in nuts. And you can see that the rate of death from heart attack, stroke, heart disease is all markedly diminished for people who are on that Mediterranean diet. The important thing for me here is that this opens up so many fantastic questions. There's such rich science here now because we have this correlation but we don't really know the causation. What is it in the Mediterranean diet that's giving these beneficial effects? And so there's so much great science to do. I also think that science can be part of the solution when it comes to global climate issues as well. And so publication of the Chatham House in the UK said that shifting global demand away from meat and dairy products is central to achieving climate goals. As I commented previously, huge amount of greenhouse gas emissions are associated with food production. So in some ways, this is nothing new. Many individuals have tried to come up with plant-based meat substitutes, going back to John Kellogg, who founded the Kellogg Breakfast Cereal Company. I don't think he was motivated by climate issues at that time, but he did want to encourage people to eat a vegetarian diet. And so before he came up with his breakfast cereal, working at the Battle Creek Sanitarium, he came up with this stuff called Protos, which is a vegetable meat. And it was treated to try to make the substance resemble a meat product. I think his motivation was quite different than ours. He actually advocated a bland diet to prevent sexual arousal. I don't think that that's what we're thinking about these days when we're trying to find plant-based meat substitutes. But yes, this history goes back a long way. And even Winston Churchill was quite a food savant in imagining what this would be like, because he wrote this book called 50 Years Hence. It was an article, actually, imagining what the world would be like 50 years in the future, writing this in 1931. And he began talking about synthetic food will be used in the future. New foods will be practically indistinguishable from the natural product. And we're seeing a lot of that. Michael mentioned that a lot of my research is in the area of biomimicry. And so we can do a lot of interesting work in polymer chemistry, pharmaceutical chemistry, and mimicking the molecules that come from nature. And we're doing a better and better job of using this type of mimicry to create new foods. Again, in some ways, nothing new, going back to the hippie days, 1971. This was really perhaps one of the very first veggie burgers. This is the guy, Gregory Sams, who began to bring that to the market. It was made of seitan, tamari, aduki beans, and oat flakes. Guess he's enjoying it. I don't know. But now this concept of plant-based meat substitutes, of course, is a huge deal. And it's become associated with some very high-tech and high-flying business ventures. A couple of big ones here in the US, Beyond Meat and Impossible, spent a lot of time and effort perfecting their products and creating plant-based meat substitutes that were really palatable, that people actually enjoyed. And the idea was not so much to appeal to vegetarians, but actually for people who really enjoyed eating meat, just to supplement their regular diet with a plant-based substitute. So I had the opportunity to work with the Beyond Meat people as part of their scientific advisory board. It was really interesting. I was working out of a garage in Southern California, just trying to figure out how to solve this problem, how to mimic meat textures. Because we have a good idea of what constitutes the structure of muscles at the molecular level. We know that the proteins actin and myosin are associate with each other, and they form these fibers that give rise to muscle. And this is really what gives meat its characteristic texture. Plant tissue is not comprised. The structural component of plant tissue is not primarily these types of actin and myosin proteins. Instead, typically it's cellulose, which is made up of very, very long chains of sugar groups, glucose monomers, all connected together, and these wrap around each other. So completely different substances. And how can we take the proteins that are in plants and turn them into something that resembles meat fibers and gives us meat textures? The answer is processing. We can take those protein extracts, purified plant proteins, and run them into a high temperature extrusion device. It looks something like this. You dump in your plant protein here, and out the other end comes a fibrous type of product that can then be chopped up and used in a variety of different ways. Here's one of these extruders in action. And you can see this is what comes out. And it's extensively cross-linked. These protein molecules are forming covalent chemical bonds with each other to give it a lot of texture, a lot of resilience, and it can actually resemble meat texture quite nicely. Because they did such a great job of coming up with better versions of these veggie burgers, it was rapidly adopted by chefs around the world, including some of the very highly regarded chefs, such as chef working here in New York, Brad Farmery, educated at Le Cordon Bleu. He's got a Michelin star. When he began serving the Impossible Burger in his restaurant, you knew that they had really tapped into something that was satisfying because, you know, for all of the great intentions, this kind of chef would not be plating something that wasn't going to satisfy the people coming into his restaurant. So it was really amazing to see what they were able to do. Here's a couple of the products here from Beyond Meat and Impossible Burger. Again, as a chemist, I'm always thinking about what is in it at the molecular level. And you can see that there's actually quite a lot of ingredients in these things. At the time, the Beyond Meat was predominantly pea protein. The Impossible Burger was predominantly coming from wheat protein. There was some really interesting lead hemoglobin. Actually, the theory behind the Impossible Burger was that these iron-containing proteins were actually responsible for giving a lot of the flavor response. So it was really interesting protein chemistry that was going on in these research groups to come up with these amazing products. So we're a little bit concerned about maybe large numbers of ingredients in there. And, you know, that's going to give rise naturally to the question, okay, it's, you know, plant-based, but is it good for you? And maybe it does make sense to reduce our intake of red meats. But what we're learning now is that ultra-processed foods are associated with really poor health outcomes, cancer and early death. And I've had the opportunity to talk about this with Marion Nestle at one point. She was quoted in this article about these issues. And she told me that she believes that this is the greatest finding in nutrition since the discovery of vitamins. And so I think Marion Nestle would say this is a really strong indication that we need to be very cautious about adding more ultra-processed foods to our diet. Again, like really interesting questions like, what is it about ultra-processed foods? Are all ultra-processed foods terrible? I certainly hope not, because I'm not planning on giving up chocolate anytime soon, which is extremely processed. But it does raise these sorts of concerns. So yes, it can be appealing. It can have some beneficial aspects, but is it good for you? And I want to get back to this notion that, you know, we really can learn so much when we think about foods at the molecular level. And I mentioned before that all flavors are of chemical origin. And in the area of mimicry, it brings up this question. Can we mimic flavors? Well, we're used to like sugar substitutes, right? Things that mimic natural sugar. But we can take this to a whole different level when we think about the biochemistry of what happens when we recognize a particular flavor. And so this is the sensory perception at the molecular level. It's a chemical phenomenon, and it is established by the activity of these proteins which sit inside the cell membrane. And these are a class of proteins called G protein coupled receptors. They sit here, they are receptors, they're waiting to receive some kind of signal or some kind of molecule that will bind in there. This is a rhodopsin protein that is triggered by light. Light hits this group in here, and it wibbles the protein around and creates a response to initiate a signaling pathway within the cell. And so virtually all of our sensory responses are mediated through these protein receptors, whether it's smells or very often hormones. These are mediated through these GPCRs. And our taste response is also mediated through these proteins as well. And that suggests the possibility that we might be able to manipulate these pathways. So I want to spend a little time telling you about this amazing stuff, the miracle berry. It's shown right here. And the miracle berry has a protein in it called miraculin. And this protein sits down on one of these G protein coupled receptors in your taste buds. It's like, okay, wow, that's amazing. What does it do? Well, it doesn't do anything. It just sits there until it encounters an acidic pH environment, at which point it undergoes a slight change in its shape and it tickles that receptor and activates it. And this receptor is responsible for giving rise to the sweet response. So we can really utilize this protein to create this amazing taste sensation. So I brought some in. You can buy it. Okay, these are freeze-dried miracle berries. It look like this. Okay. And they also come in a form that you can easily chew and swallow. This is kind of like a little tablet. So I'm going to ask for a couple of volunteers. Okay, and I just need to warn you that it will mess up your taste response, but it'll come back. So what I want you to do is chew that up and swish it around in your tongue. Don't swallow it right away. Anybody else? Any volunteer? Maybe one more. And if anybody wants to try this after the show, I've got plenty more. So I'll let that kind of work its magic while I tell you about another interesting way that we can take advantage of chemistry to influence taste response. And this is another receptor. This is the receptor called TRPV1. This is the receptor that responds to capsaicin and gives you a hot response from a chili pepper. And we know exactly how this capsaicin molecule here that's in these chili peppers sits in this receptor and turns this protein on. So my colleague, Dirk Troner, who was here at NYU, evaluated the three-dimensional structure of this protein and the way the capsaicin sat in that protein. And he came up with an analog molecule right here that has this interesting group on it that responds to the presence of light by doing a little dance. And it wiggles from this form to that form when it's hit with light at 350 nanometers. So here's Dirk here. And the incredible thing is that he showed that when you have that protein receptor in a membrane and you expose it to these molecules, you can trigger these taste responses in the presence of light, and you can turn that hot response off and on, off and on, off and on by just jiggling it with light. So he's really been promoting this idea of a concept called photogastronomy. He's got these great pictures of, like people enjoying food while having a light laser shown in their mouth. Well, let's go back to the miracle berry, okay? Because we want to find out if that's working. And so, yeah, I've got some polyacidic foods, and I just want our volunteers to try something. I've got grapefruit, orange, lemon, and lime. Okay. Another volunteer back here. All right. Yes. I highly recommend the lime. The lime? Yeah. Okay. So what are you getting? Anything? Very sweet. Yeah? The lime? Does that taste like sour?
No,
Like
sweet, yeah.
Jolly Rancher candy, right?
Yeah.
It's good.
Pretty amazing. Okay. You can take this to extreme levels. I have here some really nice vinegar. And of course, you wouldn't normally think like, oh, that's going to be wonderful, neat. But do I have a volunteer to try a spoonful of vinegar? Okay. Maybe not all of that, but just.
Pretty sweet.
Pretty sweet? Okay. So yeah, you can turn like a Guinness Guinness beer into something that tastes like a milkshake. So that's pretty phenomenal. And I think we're just getting started with this, being able to manipulate our flavor responses, maybe in ways to encourage us to eat healthier foods. And I think chefs are going to have a lot of fun playing these sorts of games and triggering taste sensations with light in their restaurants. For me here at NYU, the big payoff is being able to engage students and get them excited about topics at the molecular level. Here's a couple of students, a master's student and an undergraduate at the time, Ariel Johnson. She went on from NYU to get a PhD in viticulture and enology at UC Davis as an NSF predoctoral fellow. After that, she became the in-house scientist at the world's greatest restaurant, Noma, in Copenhagen. And now she's writing books, Flavorama, A Guide to Unlocking the Art and Science of Flavor. So this is the payoff for me. This is like, okay, success, right? Because Ariel is just doing such amazing work. So that's really satisfying for me. Let's think about what the future of food is going to be like. Here we can rely once again on Winston Churchill, who was contemplating these issues. He foresaw the advent of cellular agriculture. He said that we'll develop new strains of microbes and we'll be able to control their growth with hormones, and those microbes will be able to generate the same kinds of products that we would use instead of meat. And he said, well, we shall escape the absurdity of growing a whole chicken in order to eat the breast or wing by growing those parts separately under a suitable medium. Amazing. 1931. This is great. And that's exactly what is transpiring now in the food sector. This whole area of cellular agriculture. And it really depends upon your perspective. So some people refer to it as clean meat because it doesn't come from animals. Other people think of it as frankenfood. But it is really sobering to think about the fact that this is what our farms might be looking like in the future. Well, there's so much work to do. Lots of great jobs for students who have gone through my biochemistry class. So part of the problem is that in order to grow these muscle cells, we need to grow them in tissue culture, the big fermentation tanks. We need to give them the nutrients they need. Typically, when you do this, you grow this stuff in fetal bovine serum in the lab. Well, that kind of defeats the purpose if you're using bovine serum, and it's super expensive, $500 a liter. So we needed to be able to do a better job of growing these proteins. Richard Branson has said that he thinks, in a few decades that we won't need to kill any animals anymore, that our meat will be, coming from cellular agriculture, plant-based. It's kind of hard to argue with the appeal. Like, it's really a shame that we have to kill animals for our meat. It would be great to get around that. So I think of this as the flexitarian's dilemma. Okay? Thinking about what's going on in the world right now, it is absolutely essential that we respond to environmental and public health crises and alter our food systems immediately. And at the same time, we need to be realistic that when we make these rapid changes to our diet, we're likely to evoke unanticipated consequences to our health, especially because these technological innovations are transpiring at a pace that is far faster than we can evolve responses as a species. I remain optimistic. I just think, innovation and discovery is just inherently satisfying. I love thinking about learning new dishes, creating new dishes. Back in 1759, this poem here, translated from the French, new cooking every year because every year tastes change and every day there are new ragouts. And so you must be a chemist, Justine. If we want new foods, if we want that excitement of new taste sensations, yeah, it'll be great to have scientists, chemists, and chefs work together. So, my appeal, let's innovate, inspired by nature and in harmony with nature. And at the end, let's remember that cooking is love made physical. I'll bring it to an end and hope it's off.